Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're delighted to introduce our webinar. This webinar will be titled Procurement Pains in the Lab and How to Solve Them. So whether you're a fast-growing lab or scaling biotech or a large R&D organization, procurement probably isn't something that you signed up for, but it's become your responsibility. So what now? Today we're going to talk about what's really happening behind the scenes of lab procurement, the hidden risks, delays and cost strains, and more importantly, how to solve them. To clarify, procurement isn't just purchasing, it's the whole process of identifying what's needed, finding the right suppliers, negotiating items, managing deliveries, and making sure it's all done compliantly and cost effectively. By way of introduction, my name's Chris Roarty. I'm the head of new business sales within Amici. I've been supporting biotechs for 15 years within Amici, bringing on over 200 companies. Every day I'm speaking to new and scaling up labs about the state of the industry, their challenges and their growing needs. Ali.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, my name is Ali Crowley. I'm Head of Strategic Projects at Amici. I have over 25 years experience in the biotech and biopharma industries. I started off as a bench scientist doing cell and molecular biology, and then I specialised in sort of technical operations and facilities. And I've actually been a customer myself of Amici in one of the biotechs I was in for over 10 years. So I am well versed with all of the solutions, products and benefits that Amici can bring to an organisation.
My name's Jon Green. I'm a fractional chief operating officer of a company called ImmuONE based in Stevenage. My past life is I'm a scientist by training. I've got qualifications in cell and molecular biology. Much like Ali, actually, we have worked together before in a biotech, actually. I morphed into this operational manager, ending up VP of operations and general manager of quite a large site in Cambridge, 800 people. I've got real world experience of most aspects of running a biotech, from procurement, running IT, building buildings, running buildings. So I come well versed in my 40 years of experience in this industry.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jon. So we're really pleased to have Jon with us today to talk about his experiences and journey with Amici, and just general kind of take on how people deal with procurement in the biotech industry. And I would say as well, from my experience, that procurement is often overlooked as a really key part of the organisation to get right from the beginning. And it's not really just purchasing, it's quite complicated and it's more than that. And I think labs just really underestimate how critical it can be to get right at the beginning. So, Jon, it would be great to hear about your breadth of experience across the various industries you've worked in on what are the issues, the main issues companies face with procurement, and what could they be doing better to implement a solution earlier on.
Okay, so I think most small biotechs don't treat procurement as seriously as they should. What usually happens is, scientists end up just doing the procurement themselves. They don't do it very professionally because they're not experienced in doing it. They don't get best prices, so they get inconsistent pricing. They don't know which suppliers to go to, so you end up with a supplier list as long as your arm rather than consolidating supplies. The systems, so from my experience at ImmuONE, for instance, when I joined there was no procurement system at all. The procurement system was a series of bookmarks in somebody's web browser who tended to do some of the ordering. And there was another series of bookmarks in somebody else's browser who did the other aspects of the procurement. There was no tracking of orders. There was no sort of record of delivery particularly. And there was, even if a delivery happened, it's just a piece of paper was thrown in the bin. There was no sort of audit trail whether we'd received those things. There was lack of visibility on spend. We had no idea how much we were spending at a particular supplier because all that was buried in somebody's account on their web browser. Nobody really knew if something had been ordered. There was no central record of whether orders had been placed. So often, somebody would go to start an experiment and realize that actually a crucial reagent or consumable had not actually been ordered. In terms of things like CapEx purchasing, there was just no process whatsoever. Somebody went to the board, said, I want to buy one of these. The board said yes. And that person would then probably sit down with the supplier and try and come up with a deal. And on some of these expensive pieces of equipment, of course, that just didn't happen, particularly because they're not very good negotiators. It's not their job. The other thing that really is, there was no financial control over it. We didn't really know how much we were spending. We didn't know how much we were spending with each supplier. And actually, there was no approval process because people literally just used to go onto the web, find their favorite supplier, and click on, add to basket, and that would arrive. No idea if it was the correct pricing, no idea what the price was really. So it was all a bit of a mess, to be perfectly frank.
That's a great summary of my experience as well of being in a biotech, and why we were looking for a similar solution. And I think this is just so common. It's really underestimated. I always see procurement as, I don't see why it shouldn't be treated in the same way that HR and HSE are treated. When you set up an organization, you often at the beginning will outsource, get consultants, etc. And procurement is overlooked in that way, and I think it's obviously one of your biggest areas of spend after salaries. And as you're saying, Jon, if it's uncontrolled, how much money is actually being wasted? You don't have the oversight on what is being spent. And also, in my experience, there was a compliance risk as well, because we would get products coming in that we didn't have maybe the permissions to have in the organization, or staff were being unnecessarily exposed to hazards that they weren't aware of, or documentation wasn't in place for. So yeah, it's a big issue, and I think a lot of labs experience similar. So I guess these are the issues. What is the true cost of those issues? What can this actually mean, and what impact can this actually have on an organisation? And having been in larger organisations and understanding the business compliance end of things as well, it'd be really interesting to get your take on what can really go wrong.
I mean, there is a significant cost to not doing procurement properly, or not even sort of, consolidating some of your ordering. So, for instance, nobody actually really thinks about the cost of transactions. So if you're ordering from multiple suppliers, somebody has actually got to pay those suppliers. So there's a cost there, which is time. So I can sum it up. It costs time and money, and potentially compliance risks. So that the time comes from scientist time. A scientist employed to do science, not to sit there looking at test tubes and add to basket, and trying to find out how to pay for them on the credit card or on the sort of account and things like that. So they can lose days on a procurement task. And if it's not just a bog standard sort of consumable that they've not had before, they can spend hours trying to source that particular product, especially if it's sort of some esoteric cytokine or something like that. And the supplier management is just non-existent, because they all go to their favorite suppliers. And actually, they may be using, 2 different suppliers when actually one would do. There was no control over the spend, so it was costing us money because there was no negotiation of best prices. They just clicked on the catalogue price and bought it at catalogue price. So you're immediately losing, the discounts that are available through bulk purchase, or just through sort of, simple negotiation. And I think one of the biggest risks was lack of sort of what I call coordination between ordering and supply, in terms of when that thing turned up, there was no central record whether it actually got on the premises or not. So somebody in the lab would pick it up, take it to the lab and put it away. The person who ordered it might actually have no idea that it's actually arrived and it's in storage. So it just takes time and money. And as you so rightly said, compliance risks as well. Somebody actually, ordering a scheduled poison when they shouldn't do, with no proper storage facilities. I've known that happening years ago, that, we got a classification drug in, which should never have been on the premises. And the other thing I think is important is that these little biotechs hopefully will become big biotechs. And if they don't scale it right at the early stages, it becomes even more difficult to scale when you're much bigger. And actually, that doesn't just go for procurement, it goes for every other function that you can think of, health and safety and things like that. And I think the other sort of big thing that takes time is actually instrumentation and getting it either repaired or PM serviced, because that takes time to organise, get the engineers in and things like that. And if I'm honest, Amici takes all of the pain out of that sort of activity as well. It saves a huge amount of cost, but it saves a huge amount of time, so people can get on with the jobs that you've employed them for.
I think that's brilliant summary, John, because I think the what gets missed often in the savings that Amici can bring, everyone thinks about cost. Cost is obvious, you're going to get better discounts, but the time is really hard to measure and often gets underestimated. And, you know, in my experience as well, not just the scientists spending time trying to find things, but as you said, sometimes items get lost. They just get lost in the ether, and experiments don't happen. That causes delays, that causes costs, because there's maybe a milestone hasn't been met because that crucial reagent didn't come in time, or duplication as well of orders. And you mentioned equipment. Sometimes if it's not covered, we would find the first we knew that there wasn't a service contract attached to a piece of equipment is when it went wrong and there was no one able to fix it. And that can have a huge impact. The equipment could be out for weeks trying to get an engineer out for that. And then you've got to negotiate a contract, put it in place. So yeah, all of these things, if they can be taken away, and you know, you're not relying on paper-based manual systems that are really open to error, which, as you say, is not scalable.
No, it's not.
So I guess we've got all the problems and what the impact can be, and what we'd really love to hear from you today, John, is obviously ImmuONE sought out a solution, and Amici was fortunate enough to be that solution for you. Could you describe what impact this had, what changes you saw, and how it's really improved fundamentally how you run that area of your business?
Yeah, no problem. So I think the important thing about Amici is it's just one web-based platform that runs everything. So you would do, you know, there's lots of different modules. Not that we're using all of the modules yet because we're not big enough, but you know, for purchasing, there's one module which shows you know, what you've ordered. It allows for you know, approvals at different levels depending on, you can set the levels yourself, which is really good. So for things that, you know, that are small items, the scientists can self-approve, but for larger items it has to go through, you know, a cascade of approvals depending on the price. So that gives you the financial control which is necessary. It gives you the, without having a procurement department, it gives you access to the discount structures that they can do through bulk purchasing. Now, there are lots of platforms that do bulk purchasing. You know, universities have their own, some science parks have their own, some membership organisations run one as well. The thing about Amici is it's a one-stop shop in my opinion, because the other thing you can do non-catalogue items as a special, simply to burn through the system to get the right approvals. So, you know, if you're ordering a sandwich lunch, you can do that through Amici. It doesn't go through the procurement system of Amici, but it goes through the approval process of the organisation. And so you still can maintain those financial controls for those one-off purchases. The other thing, it gives you clear visibility about what price you're paying. You know, Amici deal with hundreds of biotechs, well, I hope they do, across the country, negotiate good bulk purchasing discounts, which just help everybody. The more the merrier. And I think that's an important thing to consider, is the discounts that you will get that you won't get if you're doing it as an individual. Procurement is an industry in itself. There are people, very highly paid people in some industries, who do nothing but procure bits and consumables and things like that. So you've got dedicated procurement specialists. It is a profession in itself, and it should be left to the professionals to do it. And actually, the big thing about Amici is that, you know, it's a virtual procurement department, which is great. You can pick the phone up, talk to them if you've got a specific problem, and they will help you sort it out. It's really good for just tracking your orders. You know, I can go onto the web, find out what I've forgotten to approve, and B, what people have ordered, when it's coming in, and more importantly, how much we spent, just to manage our cash flow. And it has, because everything is stored within the audit trail, I can go back and look at what we're spending on different companies and things like that. It is just a one-stop shop for everything procurement for a lab, and it shouldn't be underestimated. As I said before, it costs time, it costs money, and Amici saves both in spades.
Brilliant, thank you, Jon. And I think you hit it on the nail there when you said it's like a external procurement department, because at my previous place of work where I was a customer of Amici, that's exactly how we referred to Amici. They were our procurement arm. And I think the human element behind what Amici does is one of the unique selling points of Amici. And I don't just mean the support that you get ongoing when you're a customer, but there's also that onboarding element. And I think when you onboard software, any software solution, sometimes this can be quite a painful process. It can be quite difficult to implement into your organization, and the training element can be quite complex, and it can take a while for people to adopt and understand how to use the system. So I'd love to hear from you, Jon, what your experience was of how Amici was implemented into ImmuONE.
Yeah. Okay. So I've over my extensive career, I have been involved in sort of implementing enterprise systems across many organisations in different formats and different areas. Amici was actually probably the easiest one, if I'm honest. So the platform was very intuitive, which helps. So it's not difficult to use. But I think the onboarding was very, very thorough. The training was very, very thorough and understandable. It didn't delve into technical jargon. It was simply going through the system, showing what we needed to use, how to use it. And then we got sort of super support afterwards. So that if we had a problem because we didn't know how to do something, or we've forgotten, more to the point, the support that we had post-implementation was also second to none. So I think if anybody's listening to this or watching this and actually is worried about the impact of implementing something like that, is don't be worried about it, because it's very, very simple. Amici hold your hand through the whole process. It's very understandable, and actually you will reap the rewards very, very quickly, as we have.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jon. It's really great to hear that that's the positive experience that you've had. And it's actually something that is a bit of a blocker. Sometimes people think that it's going to be painful, and I think Amici we can onboard people within 10 days if that's required.
Yeah.
So there really is, it really is a very well organized process, and we get fantastic feedback on customers' experience with that. So it's really good to hear that you experience the same.
I think the hardest part for me was filling out the form, because I didn't know some of the information that you required. But that was just because I was new to the organisation, things like that. It took me about half an hour in the end, and it wasn't onerous at all. It was just so easy, and everything else was just taken away, implemented, and then we were just presented with the solution and trained on it, more to the point, and then supported.
And did the scientists find it straightforward to use as well? Did they adapt to it quite well?
Yeah, so the main person who was a senior scientist who was doing the procurement, simply because she'd been there the longest, just sort of said, "Oh, I wish we'd had this sort of earlier, because it would save loads and loads of her time." And so she was immensely grateful that I'd introduced it into the organisation.
It probably gave her a lot of time back. I know when I was managing all of the operations, I think I spent about 50% of my time sometimes on procurement alone, and it really
Yeah.
gave back that time to focus on other things. So this has been really, really useful and great to get your insights. So I guess as a sort of final note, if there are other organisations out there looking for a solution and considering Amici as a potential option for them, what would you say would be sort of the key take-home messages from this webinar to people considering that?
Don't leave it too late, because consumables the items that feed the scientific beast that is, the part of the drug discovery or other process. And the longer you leave it, the harder it is to scale it, and more difficult it is to implement. It should be one of the things you think about when you're actually starting a company up. Doing it by sort of, just going onto the web and ordering is very, very, very inefficient, and actually should be avoided at all costs. It might be all right for the first couple of months until you've implemented some sort of platform like Amici, but it's not suitable for long-term use. It's not a long-term strategy at all. And you've got to realize that, most companies have the ambition to grow into much larger companies. If you leave it too late, it becomes so difficult to scale it, that it will take you 10 times more time. If the system's there and you're just adding users, it makes it much more easy and much more scalable. So just do it early, my top tip.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jon. Really appreciated your time
and
to share your experience.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Jon. That was really, really informative. So many points that I've experienced throughout my time at Amici. It's funny how some of the challenges are just so similar across the board for all labs of different sizes and scales. We're going to wrap this up now, so thank you for joining us. I guess my key take-home message would be, if procurement is slowing you down or your lab down, then we're here to help. We can and we will streamline your processes, save you money, give you time back to focus on science. So if you'd like to book a consultation with us, please feel free to reach out, and we'd be delighted to see how we could work for you.